And let me also share my screen. Okay, and make this small. Okay. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yep. Yes, Professor.
Yes.
Okay, just a second. Something on the chat? All right, awesome. Just a second. All right. Let's see where we leave off. Let's see. S&P. This one. All right, so let's take a look at today. Let's see. We're getting started on the third week. Hope everybody had a great weekend. Let's see. The first week, right? We went over the syllabus, introduced HTML, some CSS. We spent all last week talking about CSS, Bootstrap, and we'll talk about that some more. We introduced Font Awesome as a great library for using icons and different fonts for decorating your web pages. And today and all this week and for the remainder of the semester, we're going to be talking about JavaScript. And in particular, we'll be talking about the jQuery library. Even though the first 2 weeks we talked about HTML and CSS, there's plenty more that we're going to be saying about HTML and CSS throughout the semester. But the only focus of the last couple of weeks was HTML and CSS. The focus of this week and next is going to be introducing JavaScript. And today we're going to be introducing the next assignment. So in this next assignment, we're going to be hand-holding you on giving you a lot of source code, a lot of examples on how to complete that assignment, which you can then use. You can tweak it around, you can change it a little bit so that you can then modify it for your own purposes for the assignment. We're going to focus less on the HTML and CSS, but we're still going to be talking about it quite a bit. But more and more as we introduce more technologies and new concepts, right? We're going to focus less and less on previous concepts and leaving that a little more up to you. So that's going to be the focus of this week. A couple of administrative issues. So remember, the assignments are available here, and they will be made available as we progress. So for instance, the first two assignments should be available, not the third and fourth and so on and so forth, but the second assignment should be available today. So you should be able to look at it, start looking at it. Also, the quizzes are available here. And the first quiz will be next Monday, and it will focus on what we've been covering for the last week or so. We've been covering HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, so that quiz focuses on that. Also, the quiz regarding assignment 1, it appears that there are 2 sets of rubrics, one given in Canvas and the other in Google Doc. Should we consider both of them? So the rubrics are more for our understanding. Basically, we always revise those rubrics.
就你俩中间那个地方。
Yeah, if you could please mute.
你俩房子中间不是有个柜子？
You. I think it's you. Could you mute? Yeah, excellent. Thank you. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. The rubrics are always going to be based on the latest version of that Google Doc. We made some minor changes to the Google Doc, so the rubrics that are there might not be up to date. But basically, if you've done everything that is listed on in the Google Doc, you should be fine. And obviously, any questions you might have had in the Piazza, certainly those questions that I might have answered, you should be fine. And also, the rubrics are always subject to change. Right. So, a word on the quizzes. So the quizzes will be, I had mentioned earlier that the quizzes were meant for you to take the quizzes in person at the time of the lecture, and considering that a lot of people are working, they're in different time zones, folks are in different countries, so I'm just going to make the quizzes available for 48 hours. They will be available the date that it says that's going to be available on February 8th, say, and it will be available at the in the morning, early morning, all the way up to midnight that day, and then it'll be available the next day as well. Right, so you'll have a full 48 hours to take the quizzes whenever you like. Okay, so they are timed. Usually they are about 30 to 45 minutes. And it has about 5 to 7 questions, so you should have plenty of time to take those quizzes. They are open book or open notes, open everything, so you can search whatever you want. Make sure that you become familiar with the lectures, any recordings we might have made, and any slides, any assignments that we might have done up to that point, and anything in that could be on the quiz. For A1, is it okay to use icons and fonts different from the layout? Yes. Yep. You can absolutely make it your own. We're looking mostly for the features of being responsive, that it can be laid out in horizontal and then vertical for those right, the sign up, the login, the profile, and obviously not for the editor. The editor doesn't need to be responsive. I mean, you can go ahead and try it out and practice, but it's not required. It's not that it has to match the format. Yeah, it doesn't have to match the format exactly. Nope. Will Piazza posts be answered for the rest of today? Yes, we will be answering all the Piazza posts. Until when can we expect that questions will be answered? They should be answered right away. If they're not, reach out to me or call me or text me, or feel free to pester me at any time. But yeah, no, we'll be answering all questions. What is the due date for A2? A2, let's see. It doesn't say here. Oh, there's no due date here. Well, anyway, it's on the syllabus. It's on the syllabus. It should be there. Let's see. So A2 is February 8th, February 10th. Yep, Wednesday, February 10th. I'll fix that as part in Canvas. Should be, yeah, February 10th. The homepage should be the course manager or general dashboard is fine. Either one. This was asked quite a bit on Piazza. The document says that the course manager should be the landing page. I implemented it for you. Instead, I used the index page for links that allowed you to navigate everywhere else on the website. If you take a look at all those lectures, we've answered this quite a bit. That you can go ahead and do it the way it's described in the assignment, or what I provided for you as an example was that I used the index page as hyperlinks to navigate everywhere else on the website. Either one is fine. All right, let's something else in the chat. Hi, Professor. Can you clarify what links exactly we should be submitting for assignment? Should be 2 separate links. Yeah, so there should be 2 links, right? One of them goes to where are you hosting this on Heroku, right? Once it's running on Heroku, what is the URL that you visit to see your website running, right? So that TAs can go there and see it actually working. The second link that we need is for the GitHub repository, right? The .git URL, and the TAs are going to use that to clone down your project. Once they clone it down, they're going to run it locally, right, and see if it works. They're going to look at your source code and replicate it locally on their machine. Other question. Hi, Professor. There was a post, blah, blah, blah. Students, including me, are confused about the requirements of adding classes, which we couldn't find in the assignment description. Would you mind to take a look at? Right. So the classes, I believe you're referring to the web dev dash something, something, something. All right. Although those classes. So those classes, you just add those classes, right? They don't mean anything to you, right? They mean something for us, right? They're not defined anywhere. They don't have any styling associated. They don't have any CSS rules associated. We're just expecting those CSS to be applied there. One of them allows you to practice the naming convention, that any class that belong to you as a developer, they should be prepended with with some kind of acronym, right, that you can recognize as being yours, right? So you can so that you can distinguish it from other CSS libraries such as Font Awesome or Bootstrap or anybody else CSS that you might be loading, right? If you put a prepended, you know that it's yours. So yeah, that's all. If I didn't implement those classes, will that be an issue? No, not really. We were. I'll tell you what. Really, what we were trying to do. Those CSS files, those CSS that what we were trying to do is automate the grading, and we were writing scripts that would connect to those CSS classes and verify that you had a particular input field or you had a particular drop down. And we're not done. We don't have those scripts, so it's on us, right? We don't have those scripts, so we won't be able to automatically grade you. So we're not going to fault you for not having those classes.
But sorry, the classes that you're talking about is like the form, the form control and stuff like that, or which one?
Well, no, the form control, those are Bootstrap classes, right? That make it look pretty, right? According to Bootstrap. I'm referring to in the assignment that asked you to add several classes they all started with web dev, WBDV dash or something or other, and whether you add them or not, really, it's up to you. You don't have to. It's not required.
Okay.
The purpose I asked the question is that we couldn't find those in the assignment description. Might be accidentally deleted or something.
You couldn't find what? Couldn't you find?
Those the classes.
The
requirement of adding those classes, we couldn't seem to find them in the assignment.
Yeah, let me take a look. Just a second. So for
I was wondering the same thing because I never saw those classes either, at least not in the document.
Okay, all right. So if it's not there, that's even better then.
Like I think some people dig more about the homework, and I think they went to the rubric in the homework in the Canvas, and maybe that's where they saw it, but I didn't.
Yeah, these classes I'm talking about. See that web dev dash username.
Oh.
And web dev dash password.
Okay.
We used to document them and said, this class means this class means that, and I removed that entirely. I removed that requirement entirely. Perhaps the rubric is not up to date, but again, you should follow what this document is, right? This is the basis for the assignment. Okay. And we'll update the rubric to reflect what's in this document. So you should always go by this document. The rubric is more for us, for our internal purposes, or of making sure that we can give you points for everything that is listed here. Yeah, folks must have
Professor,
done.
I had one question.
Yes.
When you said that we could either implement it with the index page or without it, if we, I did it with the index page, but does it have to be implemented in such a way that, each page has to be accessible via links without reaching to the index page, in a way that, you should be able to go to the course list from the sign up page or something like that? Or is it okay for you to have to go to the index page in order to access course list and course editor? Actually, course editor you can access from the course itself, but for the course list.
Yeah, it might be that certain pages are not accessible, and that's fine. We're gonna have your source code, so we're gonna know what you have, right? So we're gonna be able to visit all your pages regardless.
Okay,
So no, if the document doesn't say, you don't have to implement it.
All right, thank you so much.
So it's only what this document says, right? So if you lose points and it's not listed here, you can push back and say, hey, that's not what the document says. All right.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Professor, when you say in the spec to tag the commit that you want graded, does that mean like a GitHub tag, or do you mean just like when you do like your commit message? Or
No.
should it be in the comments in our submission?
It should be when you go to Git in any repository. Let's see. You can tag it by doing a right here in tags. Okay, or you can also, when you commit, let's see. Wait a minute. I'm not logged in. Just a second. Let me sign out. Let me log in. You can create a release. Let's see. Pull request, action. Where do you make a release? Issue.
click
pull
on
request,
tags,
actions,
Professor.
projects. Oh, tags here. Oh, releases. There we go. So you can say create a release. Okay, and you give it a title. You give it a description, and you say publish release. So what this will do is that it will tag your last commit, right? And we're asking you to use tags such as assignment 1, right? And then you create the release. So what the TAs are going to do, what they're going to do is that they're going to go to that particular commit that has that particular tag, and they're going to clone down that particular commit, right? Which is going to include all your code up until that point. You know, if you keep working after that in assignment 2 or 3 or whatever, that's fine. You can keep working, right? The TAs can always, look at your source code at a specific time in your commit history, right? This allows you to keep working and adding files and doing whatever you want, and the TAs, can always bring back the source code at a particular snapshot.
Are tag names changeable? Like if at like 11 p.m. tonight, I'm like, oh, I want to change this one thing in my code. Can I change the tag?
No, don't change it. What you do is that you do another commit, right? And then you do another release. And your next release will be assignment 1.1, and then 1.2, 1.3. You can have any number of tags. We're only gonna look at the very last one.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
So like, is this because the way I understood it was like the commit ID, and that's what I turn in. So
that's fine, as long as what we'll do is that if people forget, because this happens all the time that people forget to tag it or release it, we're going to take a look at the last one that you did when it was due, right? Okay. And anything after that we're going to ignore.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And but if you want us to grade something later, that after the due date, because there was some major feature that you didn't finish 2 or 3 hours afterwards, we're going to ignore it unless you tag it, right? We're going to ignore that and grade the one that was before the due date, right? So we can upload code in progress to the GitHub. Yes, you can, but only the code from where it was released will be used. Yes, correctly. Correct.
Can you make a release of a particular commit, even if it's not your most recent commit, or the release only works for the most recent one?
No, it only works for the most recent one.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right. So let's introduce the next assignment. Okay, let's talk about the assignment number 2. So assignment number 2 is when it's going to help us play around with JavaScript, right? It's going to allow us to introduce the language of programming the browser, interacting programmatically with the browser. Okay, so a lot of the things that that the first assignment was talking about or introducing, we could not do yet because we didn't have JavaScript, right? So JavaScript is a language that allows you to program the browser, and it runs on the browser. So this browser right here, I'm looking at this web page, and there's JavaScript behind this page, right? You have the HTML, you have the CSS that makes it look pretty. HTML lays out the content, and then JavaScript allows you to do behavior. So for instance, the fact that I can listen for clicks on buttons, right? And then things happen. See that? The HTML is reacting to my programs, to my actions. And the way we do that is using JavaScript. Okay. Now, what JavaScript does is that it can look at the HTML that you generate, right? The browser parses your HTML and your CSS, and it creates an in-memory representation of your HTML document, right? So this right here is it's an object representation of the actual HTML here. See that? And I can highlight, and you can see the different pieces of it. Okay. And what JavaScript allows you to do is to manipulate this object, right? This object over here is called the DOM, D-O-M, which stands for Document Object Model, right? It's an object representation of the web page. Okay. Now you can manipulate it manually. For instance, I can highlight this and I can click on the delete key. Boom, it's gone, right? So if I make changes to the DOM, right, they are reflected immediately on the view of the browser in the window, right? I can change content. For instance, I can highlight this, right? I can see where it is. See that it says Janunzi? I can make changes to it, right? And so those changes are seen immediately on the UI. See that? Well, I can do this manually myself like this, or I can modify, make it, obviously if I refresh, those changes are gone. It goes back to being Janunzi because I never manipulated the actual HTML document. Yes, I'm manipulating the model, the in-memory model, right? So I can make either those changes permanent by manipulating the original HTML document. I can make changes temporary, manually over here. I can make these changes temporarily also programmatically using JavaScript. Okay, and JavaScript can refer to different parts of the DOM and say that I want to change the inner content, I want to change the class, I want to change the URL, I want to change an attribute. I can move this around programmatically and move it up, or hide a piece of content. I can manipulate this DOM programmatically, and that's what JavaScript does. JavaScript allows you to manipulate this HTML object. You can generate new objects, delete new objects. You can iterate and create lots of content programmatically, and that's what we're going to be learning for the rest of the semester. Right? Today we're going to introduce JavaScript and jQuery, and we'll see what jQuery does. It makes things much easier. But basically, the intent is to be able to manipulate this DOM, right, the document object model, programmatically, not manually like I am doing it here. Okay, that makes sense. All right, and that kind of falls into the original idea of manipulating the of rendering content from the front end. Remember, there were two mechanisms of rendering. One was generating the HTML dynamically on the server side, and that's all the technology that was all the rave 20 years ago. PHP, Python, JSPs, ASPs, Ruby on Rails. All those are server-side mechanisms of generating dynamic HTML, and then the browser would see this HTML and will render it. But now the modern way of doing it is to use JavaScript running on the browser to dynamically manipulate all the content that you see on screen. Okay. All right. So how are we going to do that? So here's the assignment. Let's take a look at this. So we're going to be building the following, right? We're going to be building a single page. We're going to be building a single page, which is going to allow us to manipulate users, right? It's going to allow us to create users, delete users, update users, something that a system administrator would use to register new users, right? Or make edits to a user or find users and things like that, okay? This is going to be the user interface. It's going to be called user admin. And it's going to allow a system administrator to create a new user, to delete an existing user, to edit a user, right? To say, okay. And the way it's going to work is that I'm going to come here and if I want to create a new user, right? I type in their username, their password, their first name, the last name, the role. I say plus, right? And the plus will add the new user to the list, okay? Or if I have a list of users that I've created before and I click on delete, right? It'll delete those users, right? If I click on edit, right? It'll copy those users, right? It'll copy them into our form here. And then I can make changes. I can change their username, change their password, their first name, right? And say, okay. And then it changes. Now, where to save them? Where are we going to have the actual users, right? So the browser, as you figured out, right? The browser only has temporary, it's only looking at temporary things, right? Even if I make any changes to the content, you saw, right? That if I refresh, all those changes are gone, right? If I notice this change that I have done here, when I refresh my page, notice that it goes back to the original content. So any changes that JavaScript might make to the user interface and any data models, any arrays that I might have, when I refresh, all that is gone, right? So JavaScript doesn't have a place to save anything locally. Well, actually, that's not true. There is some minor storage that you can ask the browser to store for you on the local browser. It's called local storage, right? But we're not going to explore that. We're going to do something a little more powerful, much more powerful. What we're going to do is that we're going to be using a server that I've created for you, which is going to allow us to store data, right? So this server, do I have users here? Yeah, I got a couple of users here. This server is, I refer to it as the generic server. It's the generic server. And what I mean by generic server is that this is a server that everybody's going to use. I'm using it. All of you are going to be using it. And you can store anything you want, right? You can store users, you can store courses, songs, movies, whatever you want to store, right? You can add content, you can retrieve data. It's going to be a place where we can retrieve data and work with data because JavaScript is not going to have any place to put it, okay? And it's going to play this architecture of the client server architecture, right? Where you'll have the browser with the HTML, with the JavaScript being your client, and then this server being the server, right? You're going to be sending data for the server to store, right? It's a responsibility of this middle tier server, right? That any data that you send it is going to store it in the database, right? So I have this generic server that is backed by a MongoDB database, and right now it's storing there. So we're going to be so that we can focus mostly on the front end, right? We're going to be spending 3-4 weeks on just on the front end, Later, when we get, in the 5th or 6th week, we're going to teach you how to create your own server, right? You're going to be learning how to do this, right? How to have a place so you can send data and store it. And then we'll teach you how to store it in a database, right? So first we'll talk about the middle tier, creating this server, which we're going to be using the Java server that we started working last week, right? And we're going to keep working on that today, right? But right now we're only using it for hosting HTML, CSS, JavaScript. That's all. Right? We're not using it as a server, right? Of sending data and doing computation and storing in the database. Blah, blah. We're not doing that yet, right? We're going to do that about 5 or 6 weeks, right? I'm going to teach you how to do that. But here I've done one for you, which is ready to go. You can use it. I'm using here my username, but you can use your own and store all sorts of things, right? And this data, we're going to dynamically use it to render all this content, right? We're going to add users. We're going to add remove users, update users, right? So that's the assignment, right? How to use this server, right, to interact with this data set. Okay. Now there is some. Here's the architecture. Here's a sequence diagram that describes what the interaction looks like. Here's the user, right, who's using this server, and they are using your browser to navigate to your HTML page. That your Java server, your Spring Boot Java server that you are running, that you have deployed to Heroku. I think this today. By tonight, you're going to have it deployed on Heroku. You're going to go retrieve your user admin template. It's going to come back to you to the browser. The browser is going to render it, and it's going to create a DOM. It'll create a DOM. Well, it'll parse the HTML. The HTML, right? It's also going to reference some CSS files and some JavaScript files. It's going to download that. Okay, and then it's going to generate the DOM, right? The document object model. It's going to parse the HTML, the CSS, and then the JavaScript that it downloaded, right? It's going to run it. It's going to run your Java server, and the first thing that your Java server is going to do is says, I need to render this page. I need to render this page. Yes. Well, where can I fetch all these users? I don't have any users. It's going to go to the generic server. Right here, it's going to go to a URL, something like this. It's going to ask for users, and it's going to come back with some array of data, of objects. See all these objects? Well, I have three users, and then it's going to render those 3 users in the user interface. Okay, that's what it's going to do. So it's going to go fetch the data, the users. It's going to come back with an array of users, right? And then it's going to use JavaScript to iterate over that array. Right, and it's going to manipulate the DOM, right? And once it manipulates the DOM, the browser re-renders, right? And then you'll be able to see those 3 users, right? That the server is giving you back, these 3 objects. See that? Okay. So that's what it does when it first loads. Then it sets up a user interface. It creates a user interface made up of the HTML. CSS, if you're using CSS, it also downloads. This is the JavaScript where most of your work happens, right? So this JavaScript is going to be responsible for, you click, listening for you clicking here, any of these buttons, or typing at these forms, or having this drop down. The JavaScript is going to be responsible for listening for any events that you might generate. Okay. And notice I called it a controller. See that? A controller. Another common name for this might be a component. Nevertheless, it's following a design pattern, right? A design pattern that is very, very popular amongst web developers. It's called the model view controller design pattern. Okay, and the model view controller design pattern, thinks about web development in 3 tiers. Right, in 3 buckets of things, 3 buckets of technology. Right, one of the buckets is the rendering, the view, right? What the user sees. Okay, which is going to be this. This is the user interface. So this is going to be rendered by the HTML, the layout of the content. Okay, so that's the view. You know, it has to look pretty. It has to have white spaces. You know, it has to have icons. You know, this is all eye candy for human beings, right? To parse this image and make some understanding of what they're looking at, right? And that's the responsibility of the HTML, right? In Model View Controller, MVC, right? The philosophy is that these three worlds, the model, the view, and the controller, they live in distinct, very well-defined buckets of issues that, or how do you say, division of concerns. Yeah, that's what it was. Division of concerns, right? Where the concern of the HTML, right, is very, very specific. It's for human consumption. It needs to look pretty. You know, it has to have a color scheme, you know, rounded corners and background colors and foreground colors and whatnot, right? That's the concern of the view of the template, right? The concern of the controller instead is to handle any user events, right? As the user interacts with the view, right? As they click the buttons, right? As they type, as they click, as they drag, as they do anything, any events, right? It is the responsibility of the controller to handle all those events and convert them into some modification, right, of the data that then is rendered for the view. So the controller is responsible for handling all that. Okay, so that's its concern. Its concern is to parse all those events, make changes to the data, and then tell the view how to modify what needs to be rendered. Okay. So we're not going to work on the model. The model is being taken care of by me. I'm doing the model. Okay, I'm working. I have a data representation of the data, right, in a server. You're going to be doing the model later on in about 4 or 5 weeks. You're going to be creating a model in the server, blah, 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 but not yet. I'm doing the model for now. Okay. You're going to be concerned only with the view and the controller. Design pattern that is very, very popular is the mechanism, the concern, right, of integrating the client side with the server side, right? The communication, right? The HTTP communication that goes between the client and the server, right? So a good design pattern, a best practice, is to encapsulate all the communication that is between the client and the server, to encapsulate that all in one dedicated service. Okay, so and break it up into the different things that you might be manipulating. For in this case, we are manipulating users. So there would be a user service. So a user service knows how to talk to the server in the back end, right? And send HTTP posts and puts and gets and deletes, right? To create all the operations that the client needs, right? The client needs to create users, needs to delete users, needs to update users, needs to retrieve users, right? Basically, all the CRUD operations are going to be represented and implemented in this client, right? And the concern, its concern is only talking back and forth between the client and the server, right? It doesn't care about models. It doesn't care about the user interface. It doesn't care about the events. It only cares about the communication between the client and the server. The controller is responsible for mapping the events that the user generates as they click different buttons, right? I want to create a new user. I want to delete a user. I want to update a user. The controller is responsible for converting all those events into actionable items. In this case, is communication to the server and say, hey, server, you know, create this user, delete this user, update this user, right? So the controller is going to be using the client, the service client, to do all the dirty work of talking through HTTP back to the server. Make sense? Okay. So something about the naming convention. Another name for templates might have been view, right? That's also a very common name. For controller, another common name is a component. It's also a very common name, right? But I'm going to leave it as controller. Okay, either one might be a good name. Feature, format, blah blah. We did that already. Yeah, so here's a beginning of what the user admin template might look like. We gave you the beginning of what the HTML might look like, with already linked into Bootstrap, already linked into Font Awesome, and already linked into jQuery. Right? I'll get into jQuery in a minute. But basically these are the JavaScript. Here's your service, and here's your controller. Okay. Yeah. So in the body, you can create a table. So this table, we're going to be rendering this as a table, right? This is going to be rendered just as a simple table, okay, with rows and columns, right? And Font Awesome for the right-hand side. So I get you going with that, right? What the table might look like. Here it is, the heading. Also the form, right? The second row has a form with input fields. Input field for the username, an input field for the password, an input field for the first name, last name. Notice I'm following a naming convention, right? Notice that I have FLD for every field. I'm asking you to please follow those naming conventions. They're good naming conventions. FLD for fields, BTN for buttons, things like that, right? Also notice that any class that you add, right, I am prepending it with web dev. Okay. Again, it's a good practice. Any new class that you add to prepend it with the acronym of a project or an acronym of the organization. NEU might have been a good acronym to get started with. Maybe your initials might have been good. Also notice I'm using these classes because later on I'm going to use these classes later on in the assignment. You don't have to use these classes. You can make your own, but the assignment that the way I'm going to explain it makes use of these classes. And down below, right, I have here the main body of the table, and this body I'm going to use it to render the list of all these users. So in the body of the table, I'm going to render one user per row. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to have a row, a very special row. One particular row is going to be a template, right? It's going to be in the DOM, right? It's going to be rendered on the screen, and we're going to use it as a template, meaning whenever we have, if we have 20, 30 users, what we're going to do is that we're going to copy or we're going to clone that particular row, and we're going to paste it as many times as we have users, right? We're going to manipulate the DOM, right? So that we're going to use that template. I'm going to paste it multiple times on the screen, right? One per user. And what we're going to do is that we're going to replace the content. We're going to replace the username. We're going to replace the first name, the last name, the role. We're going to replace it with the actual usernames and passwords and the first names and last names of the actual user that we're going to get from the server, right? Overwriting whatever might have been there already, right? Because in that template, there might have been some dummy data, okay? It's very common in industry that you're told, you as a developer, right? Usually they'll have another developer that knows about CSS and knows how to make things look pretty, and how to convert a nice Photoshop image into an actual HTML, but they don't know anything about JavaScript, right? So what they'll do is that they'll create for you a something phony, right? And a beginning of an HTML document that looks pretty, looks beautiful, but it's static, and it's your responsibility as a developer to add the JavaScript and make it dynamic, right? So they might give you something, some content that is some dummy content, right? Some bogus content, some mock data in there, and it's your responsibility to actually make it work for real with real data. Let's see, there's a question on the chat. The first row looks like it makes new users. How does that relate to sign up page with had to make? So the sign up page that you worked on the previous assignment, that was for individual users that want to join our community, right? So those are for people that are outside of our organization, right? This is meant for a user admin that works at Whiteboard, okay, and wants to create new users, right? Create any number of users. The Laura is the first row we had to make. The first row looks like it makes new users. Yes, right. So an admin user might want to create new users. Yes. And the lorem ipsum data. What about the lorem ipsum data? Let's see. Right. So here's content, right? Yeah, this is a bogus user called Ada. First name Ada, last name Lovelace, the first developer. A bogus faculty, right? And then buttons to be able to either delete that user or edit. Also notice that I am putting a class called templates. See that? And I'm also adding here a hidden. Right? I'm going to use that as in my class so that this is going to be in the DOM, but it's going to be hidden from the user. Right? The user won't be able to see this, even though it'll be part of the DOM. So so in my JavaScript, I'm going to be able to grab this, right, with this class. I'm going to grab this TR, this table row, and I'm going to clone it. And once I clone it, I can clone it anytime, any number of users that I have, I'll be able to add it back into the DOM, right? This is still suggesting that you make commits every time you reach a stable part of your project. Styling, we do ask you to style it in such, using CSS that, obviously Bootstrap, but if there's something that's specific to your class, right, we suggest that you add that to your CSS, right? The admin controller, again, the controller is going to be responsible for handling any events, right? Any clicks, any drags, any whatever, right? And it's going to be implemented in this file, right? This is called user admin controller client, okay? And it has a specific format, the JavaScript, right? For instance, it's declaring all these variables, right? These are local variables that have a specific naming convention. Like for instance, what these are going to be, these are going to be variables that are going to be bound to HTML elements in the DOM, right? So you're going to have input fields over here, right? These input fields, right? Input fields for where you're going to type the username, where you're going to type the password. If somebody types something in there, we need to be able to read that into memory, right? We need to read that into the program. Yes. So to do that, we're going to use JavaScript to go fetch these input fields, bind to them so that we can read the value. Okay, so we can read the value that folks actually typed. Okay, so anything that that has $sign in front of it is because we have bound these variables to some DOM element, right? Using jQuery, which we'll see in a minute what jQuery is. So we're going to be jQuery is a very popular JavaScript library that is going to make our life simpler. Yeah, so we're going to use JavaScript to bind these variables to the DOM elements. We're going to grab the user field, the password field, plus all of them, right? The role, the first name, the last name. We're going to do that. Oh, here we go. There we go, right here. Also, we're going to bind to the buttons, right? So that we can listen when somebody clicks on them, right? If they click on the remove button or the edit button or the create button. Let's see, was there a question on the chat? Is it fine if we override the Bootstrap CSS classes using important tags? I mean, yes, you should try to avoid important, but sometimes it's hard to override somebody else's CSS, and you're gonna have to do that anyway. So that should be your last resort, right? You should try to do it without overriding. Ideally, you can do it. You can override it just because it's declared later in the CSS, right? So you'd include Bootstrap first, and then below that you include any of your styles and overriding Bootstrap, and that should be enough. But if it persists, then yes, go ahead and use important. But it should be your last resort. You won't lose points for it. Because it sometimes gives warning when I inspect the code. Yeah, you'll get warnings that there's a collision between the two, but I'd rather you don't use important than get the warnings. All right, so yeah, so these are all variables that we're going to grab with jQuery. Notice that it's also going to create an instance of user service. See that this user service, we're going to talk about it in a bit, but we're going to use it. This is going to be responsible for talking to the server, sending commands to the server to save data, to retrieve data, to delete data, to update data. Okay, so the server is going to do that. A couple in the chat. What do we use Ajax in the assignment? What do we use Ajax for? Yeah, so Ajax. So Ajax is the technology, the underlying technology that's going to allow us to communicate right here. This over here. We're going to be sending commands to the server using Ajax. Ajax is the underlying technology that allows us to do asynchronous communication, JavaScript communication to services out there. Okay, and we're going to be using that maybe today. All right, excellent. So what else? Okay, so then you're going to have a function called main. So main is, like the name suggests, is where the main setup of your program starts. Okay, it's going to do all the initialization. It's going to bind all our fields, right? And it's going to initialize everything, right? So there's a question in the chat. Thank you. And so yeah, so main is going to be the entry point of your program. Then you're going to have these functions. So these functions, some of them are event handlers, right? So these over here, these are event handlers, right? So when you click on the plus sign, when you're creating a new user, you're going to handle that click here in the create user. When you click on the delete user, you're going to handle that here in the delete user, right? When you click on the pencil because you want to edit a person, you're going to handle that here in the select user. Once you've made changes to the user and you click on the OK button on the checkbox, this is where you're going to handle it, update user, right? And they're going to use they're going to go out to the server. They're going to use this service to talk to the server and say, oh, create a new user, delete a user, right? They're gonna send out HTTP requests. Okay. Once those changes are made, right? If you add a new user, well, you need to append that user at the bottom, right? Or if you delete, you need to remove that user from the array, right? And re-render that. Okay. Well, we're going to encapsulate, right? If we ever need to go out to the server to fetch anybody and fetch all the users, we're going to encapsulate that into find all users, right? Now, because we're going to be doing that several times. So, instead of, doing that code multiple times, we're going to encapsulate it in this function here, okay? Now, I believe these might be optional, right? These might be optional. You might not need these. Okay, you might not need this, right? Optional, might not need this. And again, it's up to you if you actually end up using it. These, I'm sure you're going to need them, right? So definitely those you're going to need. Also, the rendering of all the users, if you give it a list of users, the rendering of the array, right, into the DOM, we're going to encapsulate that inside of render users, right? So I'm going to put it here. So this is going to be responsible for emptying out all the content, right? You're going to empty out all the content, right? And then just re-render the whole thing, iterate over the array and clone the template, right? And then paste it multiple times, okay? chat. These are CRUD functions. Yes, these are CRUD functions. Those are the, which, basically are based on these buttons that we are clicking and dragging here. What else? Okay, so here, this is just a description of each one of the functions. All right, so the controller is responsible for transforming user events into modifications of the DOM, right? And sending those updates over to the server and saying, hey, I've just removed somebody, I've just deleted, I've just updated, I've just created a new user, right? Save that on the server. Okay, so the controller is going to use the user service client, which is going to encapsulate all the communication to the server, right? And most of these are just CRUD operations, right? So create, update users, delete users, right? Or read all the users, or find a particular user by ID, right? And so the code here, I'm going to give you most of the code. It's going to talk to the server, and it's going to use this URL. That's the URL that's going to use. Okay. Now, this is an explanation of what those URLs should be. The URLs in here, you're going to use these URLs, right? For creating a user, you're going to be using a post, right? You're gonna post to this URL, HTTP web generic server Heroku app API / your NEUID, okay, which is this over here. Right? This is how the server knows that it's my data versus your data versus somebody else's data. Okay, and so you're going to create a post to send the data for the server can store it, or you're going to retrieve all the users, or retrieve a particular user, or you're going to be modifying or updating a specific user, or you're going to be deleting a specific user. See that? Okay. This is following a pattern, a design pattern. It's a RESTful API design pattern. We're going to be we're going to talk about RESTful APIs a little later, but basically what it says is that if you're going to create data and you're going to send data for storage, permanent storage, HTTP endpoint, you should use post. If you're going to be a read operation, then you should use get. If you're going to update data that already exists on the server, you should use put. If you delete it, you're going to send it as deletes. Okay. Also, the pattern of these URLs also follow a very specific format. Okay. Also based on the RESTful API nomenclature. Okay. And we're going to be covering that in much more detail in a couple of weeks. Right now, I just built it for you. Right? And I'm explaining and I'm documenting how the API works. In a couple of weeks, you will be creating your own APIs, right? For now, you're going to be using mine. I think that's it. Any questions? That's my cat. All right, so let's work on this. Let's work on it together. So I'm not going to actually do the assignment for you, right? So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to work in a parallel universe, right? Instead of working with users, right? I'm going to create a full, complete solution, but for creating other things, right? I'm going to create courses, all right? Now, I'm going to fully implement it, and you should be able to take a look at what I did for courses and translate it into users. Okay, so follow along. Right? Don't try to do this at the same time that I'm doing it, and try to understand what I'm doing and the choices that I make, and why. As I explain why I do it this way or another way, following some best practices, some industry standards, and then you try to then do it yourself, but for users. Okay. All right. So I'm going to get you going with the implementation. Then we're gonna come back next time we meet, and then review the whole thing, so that we'll talk about it a little more academically. All right. Okay. Any questions before we get started? Okay. All right. So here's the project that we've been working. If we run it, right, we should have an input field. We should have an index that we can navigate to what we've got so far. Okay. So let's do that. Localhost 8080. This is our index page, and I guess this is somebody's project. Wait, what is this? Wait. Oh, there we go. Yeah, that was some student I was helping. Yeah, we got the login screen and whatnot. Yeah, so this is what we worked on last week. Okay. All right. So I'm going to create a brand new feature, which is going to be I'm going to call it the course list, my course list editor. Okay, so this is going to be my course list editor. Right, so there'd be an in here. Right, I'm going to create a new HTML, and this is going to be course list. Okay, and let's see, make sure this is where I am. Oops, there we go. So course list. And I'm going to add a link to this, my index page. And I'm going to put it at the bottom. And this will be my course list. This course list. Okay. So if I re-render this and I click on this, there's my course list. Everybody good? So what I'm going to build is a course list editor, and you're going to be building a user admin editor, right? Where you can create users, delete users. What I'm going to build is I'm going to be able to create courses and delete courses and update courses. Yes? Right? Now you should be able to take my code and then convert that and tweak it so that it works for your users. Yes? All right. Let's see. Let's try and use some of the code that I gave you, right? Now let's see. Let's see. I gave you here in H2, I gave you a couple things that should be useful. In particular, these links, right? Where we have Bootstrap, we got Font Awesome, we got jQuery, we got services, and we got the controller. So I'm going to copy all that, right? And I'm going to paste it right here in the head. Right. Some of these are not relevant to me. Let's see which ones. Well, I'm not going to have a user service, right? Probably what I'm going to have is a course service. And probably I'm not going to have a controller, user admin controller. Probably going to have a course controller. Okay. What else? Let's see. jQuery, I definitely need that. Font Awesome, I definitely need that. I probably need a CSS style for that, but I'm going to probably call it course style client CSS. And Font Awesome, perfect. Okay, let's refresh my screen. Okay, it looks like we have Bootstrap in there. Perfect, excellent. And we're probably going to need some Bootstrap to add some margins all around, right? So we're going to say class, and we're going to call this container. Now, container is pretty nice, but notice that it has defined widths, right? And notice that it has this this behavior, right? That it changes its width as I change the width of the page, right? So I'm going to go with another one called container fluid, right? I like better. And what this one does is that it just adds a static value of margins all around, right? And it doesn't change depending on the width of my screen, right? So it's a little better for things that more for admin folks who don't really care things to be responsive, and they want to take the entire width of the screen, right? So let's see, what else? We probably also want here a table for our courses. So let's create that table. And we're going to have table head, and we're going to have a table body. Right? In the head, we're going to have a row, one row for the headings, and the headings might be the title of the course, right? The title of the course. How many, let's see, what maybe how many seats are available for that course. Maybe what semester. Okay, and that's it. Let's just go with that. So let's see how that renders. Because that renders pretty ugly. Obviously, we can style it with Bootstrap. Oops, class. And here will be what? It'll be, I think table is a nice one, right? So that looks already pretty-er. What else? So we're gonna have two rows. The first row is just a title. The second row are gonna be input fields. You know, one input field so that we can edit the title of the course. Another input field where we can type how many seats are available in that course. And the semester probably will do a select with some options where we can say whether it's available, you know, either in spring, in summer, or fall. Okay, let's see what that looks like. All right, so here's our input fields, our drop down. Let's style this so it looks a little prettier. So we can do class, and this is form control. Right, so this is the same thing that you've done for the previous assignment, so I'm not going to spend too much time there. So that looks a little prettier. One thing that is useful in the select statements, right, is that that you have here a value that this is the actual value. You know, when you interact with JavaScript, the actual value is either the value that you give it here using this the value, it's whatever content here is being displayed for the users, right? But we'll see that a little later when we use JavaScript in a minute. Okay, what else? We might want to put some buttons on the right hand side, right? So maybe an additional th here, right? We might have here a button for update, and another button for create, right? A button for create. Let's see, chat. In the chat, table header, I believe. Yes, yeah, what is that? Yes, th for table header. Yep. So notice I'm not going to style it for you, so you deal with that, right? You're going to style that. All right, so let's head over to the body here. We're going to have a table row for some dummy data that we're going to put in there. Okay, so for instance, the first one might be the title of the course, might be CS5610, right? And a couple of these. Let's see. So the how many seats? So it'll be, you know, maybe 90 seats, and we are doing it spring. Okay, so that's some dummy data that might be provided there. We can also might want to add on the last row, on the last column, a couple buttons. One for delete, and the other one for edit or select. Okay. All right. So is everybody okay? Now we can add a couple of rows just to see how it would look like, you know, just to get a feel for what it would look like, right? So if we save that, we got 3 of these, right? And we might add some bogus data. You know, this might be CS3200, and this might be CS, you know, 4550. Yeah, there they are. So we have 3, and obviously these don't do anything, right? They don't do anything. Okay. Notice that there's some missing space over here. See that? And the reason is that the headings at the top only have 3 headings, but below we have 4, right? We have 4 here. So there's a mismatch between the heading above and below. So we can add 1 heading below just for filler. We can just leave it empty, right? And now it styles nicely. Okay. Another thing here, this is that input field here. We're going to be typing just plain old text. Okay. But this one, seats, presumably is supposed to be for numbers, right? So it's always a good practice, right, to give it the correct type, right? And this should be a number, right? Also, notice how this is spilling over onto the next screen. That's started becoming too long, and you should make it so that it's pretty and easy to read. So this one's pretty easy to read, but when it starts getting too long, right, it's a good practice to break it up into multiple lines, right? So for instance, we can break this class into the next line, so it makes it easy to read. Okay, is there a question in the chat? What is form control? So all these classes that I'm using here, form control, container fluid, table, right? All of these are taken from Bootstrap, right? So if you go to Bootstrap, you can take a look at that and just visit, get Bootstrap. You can search for form. Search, where is search? Where did search go? So you go to documentation, and here you can search for forms. Right? You can search for forms, and here you have a list of all the styling: form label, form control, right? On how to style these to look pretty. Right? So I encourage you to become familiar with what's out there. Okay. All right. So let's go back. All right. So how do we make this? How do we make this dynamic? All right. So and so the way we're going to do this is that we're going to create here presumably in the same. Notice this script. This script is a script tag. The script tag is used for loading JavaScript files, right, that have programs in there, right? This script is looking for a file called course.controller.client.js in the same directory, which there isn't, right? Notice that there's not file in the same location, JavaScript. I'm going to paste it in there, and there it is. So this is going to be our JavaScript file. Everybody good? Okay. So what are we going to do here? So here, right? Let's write the simplest JavaScript code, right? Program. Alert. Welcome to JavaScript. Okay. So I'm going to refresh my screen, and notice that the alert pops up. See that? Right? The question on the chat. Even if the input type is number, we can still enter anything. So what do we define the type? So notice that if I define this type as number, notice that I can't type text. I can't type, well, E yes, because E is for exponent, right? You can only type numbers. Okay. So the browser will stop you from entering bad data. Okay. So it's some validation, right? It's good. That's why it's good to use strong typing so that we minimize the errors from folks typing in the wrong data. All right, so that's the easiest. Here's a second easiest. Instead of alert, so alert is a simple just loading it and popping something up. And the way it's working is that our code, the first thing that it's doing. Well, let me close everything else. Close others. I want just the JavaScript here. So the way this works is as follows, right? Your HTML loads. When the HTML loads, it looks at this and says, "Oh, I got to download it. I got to download a Bootstrap. I got to download a Font Awesome. I'm going to download jQuery, and I have to also download all this." Okay. And then when it loads the JavaScript, what it does is that when it's loaded, it immediately executes whatever's in that file, right? So basically it's executing this file, this alert, right? And that's why you see this alert here, the very first thing. You see that? So let's look at a second easy code. Let's do console log. So console log allows you to type to write something. Notice if I reload, we don't see anything. What it's doing is actually printing it out to the console. So if you inspect, right, and let's put this on the right hand side right here, and or you can put it at the bottom too. Let's put it at the bottom. You can see here that there's a console. See that? If I click on the console, you can see exactly what we've just typed. Okay. Let's see a question on the chat. All right, then Firefox wasn't validated. Okay. Yeah, stick with Chrome. All right, excellent. So yeah, so there it is. You're welcome to JavaScript. So this console allows you to type, to write to the console. So this is kind of like, you know, an easy way of debugging your code. You can actually see the code, right? If you look at source, you click on source, and you open here, you can see that there's our JavaScript. See that? You can click on the JavaScript, and this is your code, right? And you can debug this code. This is going to be a debugger. You can put breakpoints. You can look at watch here. You can put all sorts of things. So this is going to be your best friend, okay? From now on, right? All the source code you can debug right here in your browser. It's a full-blown browser, very, very powerful, very useful to see what's going on. Question in the chat. Is WebDev the main usage for JavaScript? Is WebDev the main usage for JavaScript? What do you mean? Well, JavaScript is slowly creeping into everything. Okay, yes, it started in web development, you know, way back when Netscape, you know, was looking, you know, in the 90s for a programming language that would allow you to control the browser. But it has slowly creeped into everything. You're in you know, in the mid 2000s, Node.js came out, and which allows you to execute JavaScript in you know, you can execute JavaScript now on the server, right? So you can make, you know, full-blown server-side applications using Node.js, right? And we'll certainly talk about that when we talk about Node.js in the second half of the semester. But you know, you can make full-blown desktop applications with Node.js, right? So yeah, no, it's creeping into everything. I think you know, slowly and surely JavaScript is like taking over the world. You know, on the front side, and also on the database storage side as well. Anyway, so yeah, there's a breakpoint. Notice if I refresh my screen, look at it. Look at that. See that? It's the code. This is spinning. See that? It's waiting to continue because it's at a breakpoint at that line, and then you can you know, step through or say continue, and then the whole thing renders. See that? Well, anyway, so let's keep going. So one thing that we might want to do here is maybe have some data, right, that we want to render. So how do we do that? So to have data, you can have variables you can declare here. For instance, you can declare courses, and courses you can have full-blown objects, arrays of objects, just like you would expect in any language. JavaScript, I think, is a little bit easier. The syntax is extremely simple, right? So for instance, for an array, you can declare static or inline or the data right here, just like you can declare a literal string or literal number. You can do a literal object, right? So you can have here an object, okay? And this format that I'm going to introduce today is called JSON. JSON as in JavaScript object notation, right? And the notation is that it's basically curly brackets, and in the curly brackets you just have name value pairs, right? So a property and a value, a property and a value, right? So for instance, I can say title, and the title of the course is CS5610, and you can have, you know, how many seats, and you can have 20 seats, and is offered the semester is offered in spring. Okay, and you can have any number of these objects, right? So you have CS5610 and 3200 and 4550 and 5200 and 4500, right? And 1800, okay? And this could be whatever. Right, and this could be fall, this could be summer, and fall. Okay. All right, so that's an array, right? And you can print it. You can display. You can just say console log courses, right? So you can render this, and if you look at the console, there it is. There's our array of objects. See that? And you can then peruse through each one of these objects that we just printed to the console. But what we want to do is render it here on the screen. So how do we do that? Okay, so let's play around with this. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to show you how to do it one line at a time, and then we're going to try and copy paste the content. All right, so let's do it. Let's show you something really cool. So here's our table. Here's our table. We want to add content, basically. We want to dynamically manipulate this DOM, right? Look at the elements. Look at this, all these elements, right? So if I click on elements, I can see the DOM. I can see the table, right? I can see the body. I want to add to the body dynamically new rows in there, right? One for each one of those elements in the array. Now, I can use plain old JavaScript, right? Or I could use any number of really cool libraries that make it so much easier, right? So what happened in the late 90s, right? In the early 21st century, is that there was a lot of battle amongst multiple players in the web space, right? Netscape versus Chrome versus Safari versus many players were trying to dominate. Microsoft, Unix, many different players were trying to dominate. What was going to be the web, and what happened is that different browsers started going their own way, trying to pull more and more users towards the folks that were using a specific browser. They were saying, people are just doing everything on browsers. They're going to be doing everything on browsers. I hope it's in my browser, right? And so one of the ways that they would entice folks to come their way was to offer that their browser did something that no other browser did, right? This cause was that there was a schism, or there was a plethora of versions of JavaScript that were for specific vendors, right? And this became a nightmare for the developers, that us developers that wanted to create an application that ran in any browser, right? We could not control the folks who were visiting our pages. What browsers were they going to use, right? We can't control that. Right? Some folks would visit our pages with Mosaic, some folks with Netscape, some folks with Chrome, some folks with Safari, right? With Firefox, and we could not control that. So our pages, our JavaScript, our HTML had to be written in such a way that it knew how to behave correctly and do the right thing for whatever browser you were using, right? God forbid you were using IE. And so the code, this JavaScript code started to become, lots of if else, lots of switch statements that check to see which version of the browser was, what vendor, and it was just a mess to write all this, right? And said, well, if you're on Safari and this version of Safari, then do this, right? If you're in Netscape and this version of Netscape, then do that, right? It was just a nightmare. So come in, enter jQuery, right? Enter jQuery. So jQuery say, you know what? Instead of everybody trying to solve this problem of the fragmentation of the JavaScript language, I'm going to solve it. Okay, and so what jQuery did is they I want to see the Rezig. What's his name? I think his name is Rezig. It's not listed here. Anyway, this developer they created a library that says, okay, instead of everybody trying to solve this problem of the fragmentation of the language, we're going to solve it. Okay, instead of you using the low-level JavaScript, use our library. Okay, so that instead of interacting directly with the browser, you use our library, and we're going to do the right thing. Right? If you want to hide something, you want to show something, you want to be able to drag something or change the background, the foreground, don't do it using low-level JavaScript. Instead, use our API, and we'll do the right thing. We will check to see which version, which vendor, blah, 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 and then we'll translate that into whatever the underlying browser-specific commands are. Okay, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to be using jQuery, and we're loading it. We're loading it here, right here. See that? jQuery version 3.1. Okay. Now you can get the very latest if you go here for download. And actually the very latest is 3.1. And so we can get the you can also slim blah 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 download. I don't want to download it. Production compress. No, I don't want to download it. Where is the migrate plugin? CDN, there we go. Using jQuery with the CDN, Google CDN. You can just copy this right here. You can copy that, right? And you can bring in the latest, the very latest. And that's what we're gonna do. I'm just gonna comment this out. I'm gonna bring the very latest jQuery. There we go. Now we got the latest jQuery. Okay, so what can we do with jQuery? Let me show you what you can do with jQuery. All right, so in our code here, what you do in jQuery is the following, right? You can do things such as actually first let me move this controller. I'm going to move this controller. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to put it later in the code. I'll show you why in a minute. I'm going to put it down here. It's going to be the very last thing right here. Okay. So right before I close the body, right? And what I'm doing is actually very common. You'll see very much examples of putting the source code as the very last thing in the body, right? And I'll explain that in a minute. Okay, so in the client, what I do is I'm going to show you. I'm going to try and manipulate something in the DOM here. Okay, so for instance, this H1. See this H1? We can grab that. We can grab that and manipulate it. Right now, it's this right here. It's the background is white and the foreground is black. Okay, so from my JavaScript, I can use jQuery. Right, when you load the jQuery library, you get this function, the jQuery function. Right, it's a global function. You can call from anywhere, and it's J uppercase QUERY. And here you can put as a parameter, you can put CSS that can reference this H1. For instance, what would you do to change this background to be red? Well, you would do something like this, right? You would do something like style, and you would use H1, and then you would say background color red, right? That's what you would do with CSS, right? And there it is. It changes to red. Make sense? But I want to do that programmatically, right? So I'm going to comment this out for a second. Comment it out. So it's back to white, right? So how do we do that programmatically? I want to do it with jQuery. So jQuery, you can do the same thing. What jQuery takes as argument is this right here. See that? The left-hand side of a CSS style rule. Okay, so I can say here H1. What that's going to do is that it's allowing me to reference this H1. There it is. So I'm going to do H1. Right now, it's nothing. It's not doing anything. It's just grabbing it. It's grabbing, but it's not doing anything with it. I can assign it to a variable, right? The heading. Okay, and let's see. Let's print it out to the console. Let's print it out to the console. The heading. And see what it spits out in the console. So console. There it is. See that? This is what it spits out. Notice that it's an array. It's an array of H1. Okay. This H1. And so if there were more H1s, it would have grabbed all the H1s, right? But there's only one of them, right? Notice if I hover over it, notice that the first element here is actually referencing that part of the DOM. See that? This part of the DOM, which is this one. In the elements, it's this H1 right here. See that? Right? But I can now programmatically grab it and I can start manipulating. I could, for instance, say the following. I can say the heading. Now the heading, it's a jQuery object. Okay, it's a jQuery object that now has all sorts of functions attached to it that were not there before, right? For instance, one of the things that is attached to it for now is, for instance, you can say remove. So if I refresh this, poof, it's gone. If I go back to my elements, notice that my H1 is no longer there. H1 is no longer there. If I refresh, it's there for like a second and then it goes away. It was right. So if I comment this out, if I comment that out and I refresh, my H1 is there. See that? It's there. But if I uncomment this, I am programmatically removing that DOM element. It's gone. It's no longer there, right? But that's not what I wanted to show you. Let's do some other things. I can say the heading. I can change the content inside of it. I can say replace the HTML content that is inside. Make it say instead of wait a minute. Instead of course list, I can change it to say course list editor. Okay, so I can now refresh. There it is. I am programmatically changing the DOM value in there. Okay, let's see, chat. A couple questions. So that would remove every H1 that could be on the page. Yes. Yep. It would. In this case, yes, it would remove all H1s. And you can be very specific, right? You can give it instead of being H1, you can give it an ID, right? So for instance, I can say you could give it an ID, right? The heading, the course lists heading, right? Okay. So now I can be much more specific, right? I can say, hash. The CSS for this would be what? H1 hash, and then the course list heading. So now if there are multiple H1s, then this one is specifically for that one H1. Okay, and this should still work. There we go. What else can I do? Well, not only can I change the internal content, I can also change the background color. I can set any CSS attribute. I can set any CSS attribute to whatever color I want, to any values. I can change, for instance, I can change the background color attribute. I can change it to red. If I refresh, it didn't work. What? Wait a minute. Oh, I misspelled it. Background. Refresh. There we go. It's red. Or I can change another CSS. I can change the foreground color to be yellow. So now it's yellow on red. Okay, everybody good? All right. Now I can also combine, since all these transformations, all these operations are on the same element, what jQuery does is that each one of these functions returns the original object. Right, the original object, so that what it allows you to do is to string together all these transformations, right? So for instance, what I can do here is that I can string them all together like this, so that you take the heading, right? You apply this transformation, and this function returns this object. So it's as if you would be applying this to the original, right? And this one returns the object, so the next transformation can be applied. So if I refresh, notice that it works just the same. Right? I can change this to blue, right? And the operation just works the same. Now, obviously, this makes it very, very hard to read. So very commonly, we break it up into multiple lines, right? So that we can easily read all these operations. Make sense? All right. Any questions? Make sense, everybody? Did I lose anybody? Okay, so jQuery is very, very powerful. So let's see, what we want to be able to do is to work with these courses. This is what we want to do. Okay, we want to add content, not just change content that's already there. Okay, so let's try and now let's try manipulating these rows. How about that? Let's try manipulating these rows. Okay. Well, actually, something more interesting. What about adding content? Let's do that. For instance, let's grab not the head. Let's grab the body. Let's grab the body right here. Okay, so let's do that. I can grab var. Let's see there's a chat. I believe ID must be unique. You can use class. Yes, you can use class. Yeah, anything that is a CSS, anything that is valid CSS, you can pass it as an argument to jQuery. Okay. All right. So let's grab the table body. Right. So how do we do that? The body is right here. Right. I can say jQuery and grab the body. There we go. Right. What can I do with the body? Again, I can do whatever I want. Right. I can remove it. Right. I can say the table body dot remove. Poof, it's gone, right? But I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. What I want to do is create new content. I want to create new content. How can we create new content? Well, let's see. We can in the heading. Let's see. In the heading, you can append. In the heading, we already have course list editor, right? And we can append something else, maybe a bang, right? So there it is. See that? We added a bang, right? So we appended to the heading, right? A bang, or you can, course editor, or we can append something more complex, right? Add, remove courses. Okay, so there it is. So add, remove courses. Okay. It could be something more complex. Okay, so for instance, instead of appending just plain text, okay, to the heading, right, we could append whole HTML things, right? We can append maybe a button, right? We can append a whole button, okay, and say go. Right, so that's a whole button, right? It's a whole HTML piece of element in there. So jQuery, not only can you pass just plain text, you can pass it also actual HTML. Let's see something in the chat. Why did you add hash at line 13? I was just pointing. I was just making the point that if you had multiple headings, right? If you had here a heading course list, right? And down below you might have another H1. Okay, register for courses now or something, right? If I refresh, notice that this H1 has the same name H1, but this H1 has an ID. Right, so that I'm here only manipulating that heading one. I'm not manipulating the other one, right? So you can be specific on which heading you're talking about. ID is used to reference ID as opposed to, yeah, you can use either hash. Hash means that you are referencing IDs, and class you can reference with the dot. Yes, yeah, hash means you're referencing something by ID, and dot in CSS is used for referencing classes. All right, excellent. So let's see. So we have the heading. There's the heading. And in the heading, oh, I'm sorry, not there. So this table body, we want to add to the body, the table body, just like we added a button here. I just showed you, right, that we can add a button to the heading. Well, in the table body, we can append. What can we append to the body, to the table body? Let's see. In the table body, what do we have in the table body? In the table body, we have this big row here. See this? this row right here. We could copy that, right, and then paste it in here as a string. Right, we can paste it in here, right, like a long, really long string, right, like a long string. So let's see. Right now we have 1, 2, 3. If I refresh, see that this last one is being added dynamically by this append, which is kind of hard to read. And it's especially with all these pluses, right? So there's a new syntax in JavaScript which doesn't use quotes or double quotes. It uses backticks. Backticks allows you to type long HTML. It doesn't like it. I think I need to change the preferences. My IDE is complaining. I'm going to change the language to be JavaScript, and I'm going to change it to ECMA 6. ECMA 6 is the latest JavaScript version, and hopefully, there we go. Now it understands it. It understands that this is proper JavaScript. So in JavaScript 6, the newest version of JavaScript, the backtick allows you to type really, really long text, right, without having to do the concatenation plus. So this is much easier to read. All right, so there we go. So I'm pending this. I can even put this in a for loop. I can say for, right, var I to 0 to I less than 10 I plus plus, right? I can put this in a loop, right? And if I run this, notice that I can generate 10 of these. See that? I can generate 10 of these. Okay, which begs the question: ooh, if I could do that, right? I could absolutely, perhaps, as I'm iterating, I can grab each one of the courses. I can say var course is courses sub I, no? And then these would be what? These would be the titles that I grab from my array, right? Also, I wouldn't do 10. I would do what? I would do courses.length, right? I can say, instead of 10, it would be courses.length, right? And now these titles could be what? It would be the course.title, the course.seats, and course.semester, right? So how do we do that? Well, what we're going to use a modern a way of concatenating or embedding variables inside of a string, right? And you use this syntax, $, curly brackets. $, curly brackets allows you to reference a variable, in this case, course. Okay, course is what? Course are the objects as you're iterating over the array, right? So first is this object, then this one, and so on and so forth, okay? So here we want to print out course.title. This would be course.seats, okay? And this would be course.semester, right? There we go. Now if I come back and I refresh, there we go. See that? There's our list of courses that we created, right? 20, 23, 34, 45, 56, 67. See that? Okay. Does this make sense? Is everybody still with me?
Yes, Professor.
All right. Awesome. Great. Now this is such a useful algorithm, right? That actually this could be great if I could put this inside of a function. Put a function and call it, render courses, and it can take as argument the courses, right? And I can put this like this, so I can reuse this as a function. So I can call it anytime I want to render my courses. Right? Anytime I want to render my courses, right? I can say render courses, and I can pass the courses array. So there it is. I can render it. Now, I probably don't even need the dummy ones in there, right? but I'm going to leave them for a bit. Is everybody still okay? All right. So how about being able to create a new course? I'd like to be able to create a brand new course. Right. So for instance, I can say function, right? Create course, and I can pass in a course object. Right. I can pass a course object. And what the creator of the course would do is probably just do what? Probably just append a course to the array and then ask to render that course over here, right? So for instance, it could do something like courses dot push the new course. This appends to the array, and then just render the course. Okay, so I can call this function to create a new course. I can say create course, and I can pass it a JSON object. I can pass it a literal JSON object that has the form like this. Okay, that has this nomenclature, right? So let's create some dummy ones, right? So 1111, right? 11 and fall. Let's create just a few. Yeah, so this would be 2222, 3333, 4444, right? 223344. Okay, so if I re-render this, notice that this didn't work. Oh, see what's happening, right? Looks like it's adding it. There we go. See, that's adding it here. Looks like it's adding it here again. I see that? So I think it is working. The problem is what? The problem is that every time I call render courses, it iterates over the courses and it keeps appending. So whatever I had appended earlier, it's still there. So it just keeps appending to the end of the table body, right? So what we should probably do is empty the table body from whatever was there before we render it again. Right, so let's do that. We can take the table body and we can just say empty. Empty meaning whatever the content, whatever children DOM elements are inside of the TB of the T body, just get rid of it, right? But don't get rid of the actual table body. Get rid of whatever's inside. Meaning, right, whatever rows you had before inside of the table body, just empty it out, right? Anything that was there. So if I refresh, now it works, right? So notice that we had added those ones in the array. Plus, now we have these 4 that we just added there, okay? Well, what if we want to add, not like our function here, but maybe a button that we click on to create new courses, right? Maybe at the top, we might have a button, right? That says add course, all right? And we want to click it. Okay, so we want to grab this button and then listen for incoming requests, events, as you click on that button, right? Now we got to be careful because there's a whole bunch of buttons in here. You gotta like delete, select. There's a whole bunch of buttons here, right? So we want to make sure we bind to this specific button. Okay, and here I'm going to, again, I could use either ID, right, and call this, web dev create course. Right, I can use an ID, or I can use a class, right? I believe in the assignment, I use an ID. I'm not quite, I don't remember. I'm going to use an ID here. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to go back to client, right? And I'm going to grab that button somewhere. Okay, I'm going to grab that button and say var, and it's this button, the add course button, right? So I'm going to call it, add course BTN, and I'm going to use jQuery to grab it, to bind to it, and it's going to be an ID. So the the way you use CSS to refer to this to an ID is to use hash, right? I can say hash and then this ID here, right? I could have used button in front of this. I could use button whose ID, but because ID is already meant for it to be unique, right? There's, adding button in front of it doesn't make it any more unique, right? So this is just enough, right? Now that we have that, what we want to be able to listen for an incoming click event, right? We want to listen for, if there's a click, we want to be able to respond to it, right? And the way we're going to do that is by saying add course button. Again, because we created it with jQuery, now it has functions such as, delete, right, remove, empty, append. All those are functions that are added by jQuery. And another one that is added by jQuery is click, right? And click allows me to give a function here and listen for incoming events. So I can put a function in here. In that function, I can say alert, adding course. Okay, so let's refresh. So there's our add course. If I click on it, notice that it pops up that alert. See that? Add course. So in there, we could put logic that just appends to the array, right? So what we could do what? We could call this function right here, create course, right? We can call it, right, and give it a bogus title. Right? We can say new course, okay, and seats is 100. Okay, this is hard to read, so I'm going to break it up into multiple lines. Okay, there it is. Let's try it out. Let's try it out. So this function is running whenever we click. Let's try it out. If I add course, scroll down, there it is. See that? New course is being added. Let's add it a couple of times. Let's click it a whole bunch of times. If I go down, notice that we've added a whole bunch of times. See that? But now I have to scroll all the way down. So instead of create course, instead of append, right, we could use prepend. And you can guess what prepend does. Let's see, is there a question on the chat? How is click different from on-click attribute for a button? So it allows you to create how do you say? Actually, no. This click does exactly that. It adds to the on-click, but it allows you to do it programmatically without declaring it on the element, right? You can declare it later in code as opposed to declaring it on the element itself. But it adds an on-click event handler right on whatever element. Yeah. So prepend. Notice what prepend does, right? Is that it appends at the beginning. See that? So you see all these courses being added at the beginning as opposed to append. Append adds at the bottom, and prepend adds at the top. Okay. So this function, notice this function has no name. See that? It has no name. So we call this an anonymous function, a function that has no name. Sometimes it's also referred to as a lambda function, right? Lambda function, right? It's not meant to be called anywhere else but inside of this click function. Now, some folks find this syntax somewhat disturbing, and I don't blame you. I found it disturbing, when I looked at this 10 years ago, and so because it's like embedded inside of this click. It's very hard. So you could just grab this function and make it into an actual function. Let's put the function right here, right? And we'll call it, add course. Add course, right? And then you can use that as a reference here in the click, right? And this will behave just the same. Okay, everybody good? All right. How about delete a course? How about delete a course? So deleting a course would be part of what? It would be part of this delete over here. So this delete over here, right? Right now it's not doing anything, right? It's not doing anything. So what we need to do, what this delete needs to do is what? It needs to know where we are, right? What row index are we're in, right? We need to splice that object, right? Based on that index, we need to splice out the object from that array and then re-render, right? So let's try and do that. Right? So this delete, notice this delete is happening when? It's happening when when I'm dynamically rendering this, no? It's happening right here, this button right here, see that? This button right here. So how do we do that? How do we tell each one of these buttons, right, that we want these to be clicked? Okay, so what we're going to do is that we're going to add, notice that I can't use an ID here. I definitely cannot use an ID because I'm going to generate a whole bunch of these, right? We're going to, copy paste this over and over and over. And so we can't say that this is going to be unique. Instead, what we could do, maybe we could give it, maybe we could give it a class, right? And say class. And this is the web dev delete, okay? Delete. So that whenever we click on it, right, it'll say which one are we. But we can also maybe add a number here, where we could put maybe the ID, the I, right, the index of the array. Right, so we could put here the index right here. So we say I. Let's see if this works. So if we refresh, if we look at each one of these rows that has been dynamically generated, we can see that it has not done anything. Oh wait, no, let's look at the button. Oh yeah, look at it. It worked. See that button? It has a class and it has the ID 9. So we could grab that ID somehow, right? We could splice the array, right? So let's do that. What we'll do is we're going to say that after the render courses renders, okay, once it renders, we want to listen for this click. So we're going to do that right here after rendering, right after rendering, that we know it's been added to the DOM. Right? At this point right here, we know that we've added the content to the DOM, right? So we can say, well, grab the jQuery. Grab the jQuery. Now, this is a class, right? This is a class. So I can grab it using dot, my web dev delete. Yes? What do I want to do? I want to assign a click event. Okay, and here's the function. Okay, and let's see if we could do an alert here, maybe a console log, and say delete, right? Delete. All right, let's see if that works. All right, so let's look at the console here. Let's refresh. Let's click on this delete. There it is. See that? It is listening for that delete. Every time I click on this delete, any one delete I click, right? And notice that it's printing out. See, it's 7 times I've clicked it. But we need to know which one you clicked. Which one did you click? Well, when these event handlers like click, right? Whenever they call the event handlers, they pass an event that has all the information about the event that just occurred, right? For instance, that click that just occurred, all of that is inside of this event. So let's print out this event here. Let's print it out and see what's there. Let's click on this delete. There's the event. If I click on it multiple times. Let's see what's inside. Okay. Notice that already we see some clue here. See this button number 3? See that? There's button number 0, button number 2, button number 1. Looks like there's some information in there stored where? Look at this, in the target. See that? Target. All right, so we open this up, we'll notice that in the target, where is it? Target. Notice that if I hover over it, see that it highlights the button that it's tied to. See that target. Okay, so if I can get the target, right? So if I get the event dot target, let's print the event dot target. So event dot target, print that. Let's click here. There it is. There's the button. That's the button that got clicked with the ID. See that the ID? There's ID that was just clicked. Okay, so we should be able to grab the ID from there. Okay, now the let's see. Oops, there's a question in the chat. Is today's lecture meant to be longer than usual? Why? Did I pass? Am I beyond my time? Oh, sorry. I thought this went to, oh, I'm sorry. It was till 4:30. I thought it went to 5. I'm sorry. All right, we'll leave it here. It will. I'll post this and make the source code available. I'll push it so that if you want to take a look at it, and so you can start playing around on your own and start practicing. Okay. Sorry about being longer than usual. All right, folks. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Professor.
Thank
Take care. Bye bye. I was having so much fun.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.